पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज
Happy Independence Day, Pakistan. As the clock strikes midnight here in the US, Pakistan has officially started marking 79 years of its freedom. But let's be honest about the reality of what that freedom has actually looked like. For decades, the playbook for absolute power in Pakistan was blunt force trauma, the classic military coup. Ayub Khan declared martial law and ruled for a decade. Yahya Khan held the reins for 3 bloody years. Ziaul Haq gave himself 11 years. Pervez Musharraf clocked in at 9. But eventually, the military got self-conscious. Global PR changed, and rolling tanks into Islamabad was suddenly out of fashion. So, we entered the era of extension. First, they threw coups. Now, they just secured longer tenures. General Kiani quietly squeezed out a 3-year bump. Then, General Raheel Sharif aggressively courted an extension before settling for a lucrative coalition job in Saudi Arabia. General Bajwa practically strong-armed Parliament into giving him a historic 3-year lease on life, and also charmed and then ruthlessly dumped Imran Khan after getting that procedure through him. But then we got to today, the final perfected evolution of the Pakistani strongman. Field Marshal Asim Munir looked at the history books and decided that declaring martial law was just too unsophisticated for this Pindi boy. Why through a messy, illegal coup when you can just simply rewrite the system around yourself? Munir didn't break the constitution. He tailored it. He legally crowned himself the nation's first ever chief of defense forces, seizing supreme operational authority over the Army, Navy, and Air Force, a level of official concentrated power no single army chief has ever enjoyed. He locked down a 5-year term that could easily stretch to 2035, and then, for good measure, he secured lifetime immunity from any sort of prosecution. And here is the ultimate kicker. The old dictators needed massive global crises to buy Washington's love. Ayub got the dawn of the Cold War. Zia got the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Musharraf got 9/11 and the war on terror. What did Munir get? Not much. He inherited a fractured world, a bankrupt economy, and absolutely no blank check American war to fight. Yet, somehow, he is still cashing in. He has secured Washington's attention, billions in Gulf petrodollars, and a parade of European diplomats practically thanking him for his global service. In fact, the Norwegian foreign minister was just in town asking Munir to help in opening up the Strait of Hormuz. That's how important the man has become. This is the Pakistan paradox. And this is the beginning of the empire of Asim Munir, in a state which burns on the inside while its army architect takes a victory lap outside. To help us unpack how this one man has pulled off this constitutional masterclass while playing the geopolitical chessboard and effectively running Pakistan through his hard state into the ground, economically, politically, and democratically. We must understand what goes inside this man's mind. And we are joined by my good friend, Sadanand Dume, to help us unpack all of this. Welcome to Mahaz. Stay tuned. And because of the nature of the subject we are now going to try to broach, Field Marshal Asim Munir's ambit and his ambitions, nobody else better than the sharpest pen on South Asia for the Wall Street Journal, my good friend Sadanand Dhume of the Council on Foreign Relations from Washington, D.C. How are you, buddy?
Good to be here, Wajahat. But saying sharpest pen for the Wall Street Journal, it reminds me of that old joke about Mad Magazine, which was number one in a field of one. So,
TK, I'll take it. I'll take it, man. I'll take it lying down if it's for the journal. Okay, now you've penned. I'm going to stay with that. You've penned this compelling piece earlier today. Here, let's take a look at it. Field Marshal Munir and the Pakistan paradox. Your subheading is: a powerful military gives the country global influence, but stifles its economic and political modernization. And there he is in all his glory, with his digital camo on, with his 5 stars gleaming, looking pretty good for his late 50s. The one and only, and not lonely, Asim Munir. Now, it's not often that the Journal, or pretty much any American newspaper, dedicates a column to a man in uniform, way out there in a middle power, for a middle power, which didn't really matter much. But you've done a pretty good job. Now, I'm going to ask you about the column, but before we dive into geopolitics, a quick plug. My buddy's not going to say it, but I will for him. Sadanand is the author of the upcoming, and I'm quite excited about this, of the upcoming book, Tinderbox, The Unpredictable Rise and Uncertain Future of Modern India. He's taken an interesting and skeptical take on our mutual friend, Mr. Narendra Modi. And even though he appreciates India's economic rise, he warns about the challenges that a nationalist or a hyper-nationalist, muscular Hindu nationalist India foresees. Everybody between Washington and Beijing is watching out for that book. You should too. It's available on Amazon. The link is in the description. And I will ask Sadanand a couple of things for him, allowing him. Actually, I am going to shamelessly plug the book for him as I ask him a couple of questions about the book. But here we go. All right.
Thank you, Wajahat. You're very kind.
All right. So let's talk about my man. Let's do this. Here he is. There he is. All right. So first question, simple question. You explain obviously to an American audience that he has a lifetime immunity. Every Pakistani knows this, but now I guess a lot of Americans do too. He controls all 3 branches of the military. Every Pakistani knows this. Now I guess a lot of smart people here do too. Read your piece. And then he could stay in power till 2035. But I just wanted to ask your personal opinion. Do you think the Pakistanis still have an army chief, or did the parliament accidentally elect a supreme leader? How do you see this man? Because there's an overarching description of his ambit that you give. So how do you see this man develop?
So, he's a fascinating figure, right? Because on the one hand, it's sort of a little bit difficult to place him, right? Should we place him in the tradition of army chiefs who directly and formally took power? Is he in that sense a successor to Ayub Khan, Zia-ul Haq, and Pervez Musharraf? Or is he in the tradition of powerful army chiefs who wielded their power behind the scenes, right? I mean, I think in recent years, Kayani is a good example of that. And the more I've read about him, and Wajahat, you know this, you have such deep background on military stuff, so feel free to correct me if anywhere where you think I'm sort of mistaken. But my sense of it is that he's a different type of person, right? A different type of figure, where on the one hand he has not taken formal power, but on the other hand, if he remains till 2035, which is certainly possible, he may end up being more of a more significant figure in Pakistani history than Ayub, Zia, or Musharraf. And that's saying a lot, right? Because among the army chiefs who have wielded power, but not, wielded power behind the scenes, but not taken power themselves, I don't think there's anyone like him, right? Who has accumulated so much power, given himself, this the 5-year term, the room for extension, the immunity, chief of defense staff, uh, the field marshal star, all of this stuff coming together. And it's particularly interesting, I think, for an outsider like me, because like many people, I was, following the debates about him when he was first made army chief in 2022. And there was a consensus view, right, that this person was kind of not seen as the strongest candidate. He was seen as an underwhelming pick. And obviously, there are echoes of that in Pakistani history, right? The most famous one being, of course, Zia, who was promoted over the head of several other generals, and then we all know how history turned out. But nonetheless, I think it's a sort of it's a very, I keep coming back to this analogy in a way, but it's a Game of Thrones kind of story, right? Where this guy, he somehow has very strong plotting or political or intrigue, or some he has a skill set that has allowed him to bounce back after being sacked as ISI chief, number one, then becomes army chief, then basically, outmaneuvers, at least for now, history is not, written until it's written, but at least for now, outmaneuvers the most popular leader in Pakistan in a generation, and perhaps ever, Imran Khan, and manages to, overcome deep skepticism towards Pakistan in Washington, D.C., with the change of administration and with Trump coming in. And has, I think, I think any neutral observer would say, has, pulled off a bunch of foreign policy feats that most people would not have regarded as likely or even plausible if we had talked about this, say, 3 years ago, right? So not only the frontline seat that Pakistan has had on the Iran mediation, but then you had the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan pact last year, and now you have the Mecca pact, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. And so in many ways, he's just a very interesting character. And I feel that American readers know very little about him. So that was really the purpose of, writing this column. But then the other part of this is that all of this takes place against a backdrop of, a pretty bad domestic situation. So this kind of ability to ride both horses doesn't have too many precedents, right? Where you've got things kind of going not so well on the home front, but going brilliantly on the external front.
Okay, so hold on to your horses there about the two fronts. I definitely am piqued by that. That's the crux of your piece. We're going to come to that, but I want to save the best for a little later. But sticking with where you are, sticking with the Beltway, sticking with the precedents that you've mentioned, that we've seen this party before. An underwhelming, underrated choice in GHQ who surprises many. You also mentioned in the piece that his predecessors have been to Leavenworth, have been to Bragg, have been to these fancy American and British defense colleges. And this one went to Indonesia and Malaysia and Japan. And the most sexy international thing he ever did was lead a brigade in Saudi, right?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Indonesia connection. I was aware of Malaysia and Japan.
So premised on that, if he's done all of that and still made it, that's fine. He was a political pick by, it was up to the Sharifs. So whatever, they've done this before. The fact that Nawaz Sharif has picked a good third of Pakistan's total army chiefs is kind of ridiculous about how he always manages to do it. But that's a whole other vlog or a whole other interview at some other point. My question is simple. Why does Washington always fall in love with the suave general who can give a good briefing? What is it about Pakistani strongmen that Washington laps up every time we have one and we send him over to DC? They come back more empowered and more confident. And this has been happening for decades, Adana. What do you think it is?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm not sure if all of the generals who Washington has fallen in love with have been particularly suave. You could certainly, I would certainly apply that to Ayub, who was, genuinely a sort of charming figure for many Americans, right? In the Eisenhower dollars. I think in Zia's case, I don't think Zia particularly evoked warmth. I think it was just very instrumental. It was that the U.S. had a problem in Afghanistan. The U.S. set out to bleed the Soviets, and Zia was the instrument. The primary instrument was the Pakistani military. So that was instrumental. And I would put Asim Munir also, despite the flattery of Trump and the Nobel Prize and my favorite field marshal and all the rest of that. I think that the answer really is that what the Pakistani army has been very good at is identifying something that the U.S. needs or wants in the near term, and basically saying and positioning itself as the only institution in the country that can deliver that, right?
So if we were going to take that, I'm going to press that on a little further. If we are going to take that, how is it that fine during Ayub's time, it made sense. During Zia's time, it made sense as well. It was
Musharraf's time too, war on terror.
So absolutely. So all three were lucky enough to get wars. The beginning of the Cold War in Ayub's case, the end of the Cold War in our friend who's on the screen here, Zia's case, and the beginning of the war on terror in Musharraf's case. Important American expeditions and projects. But this man has basically he didn't really get a war. He just got a war a few months ago with Iran, which he obviously jumped on. And we've talked about Pakistan's role as a mediator before, so we're not going to go there. If you want to watch Sadhana and me duke it out about Pakistan's mediation role, do check out our previous interview. It's on this playlist. But he just got the Iran war like 4 months ago. I am more interested in how you think he managed to, out of perhaps thin air, in the wake of Operation Sindoor, when India, Pakistan's great rival, the darling of the bipartisan darling of Washington for the last good 2.5 decades, was outmaneuvered in a matter of months by this man. You mention it in your column, the Nobel Peace Prize gimmick and all of the other things which were required to get into Trump's court. But tell me a little more about what you think he did. What was that magic trick he pulled out of nowhere?
I think it's a really important distinction you make, Wajahat. And that's why I think that, this current honeymoon between Pakistan and the US, it's on much thinner ground than the previous phases, because it doesn't have this overarching strategic pull factor, right? There's no equivalent of the war on terror or the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan, or the height of the Cold War in the 50s in the Ayub era. So he is working with a much worse set of cards geopolitically, but yet he has pulled it off. And I think there's sort of several ingredients to it. One is that I think he developed a very close and good, solid relationship with CENTCOM, the U.S. military. He made himself useful, even though counterterrorism doesn't have the same salience that it had, say, during the Musharraf era. It's not completely irrelevant either, and I think that he was able to position himself as someone who was able to deliver suspects who were of importance to the U.S. The Abbey Gate bomber is the most important and the most obvious example of that. I think he was, to an extent, able to sell some, promise of economic cooperation or potentially potential business deals that I personally am a little bit skeptical about whether they're ever going to pan out. But, the whole critical minerals thing, that he was able to sort of sell that. And it's certainly true that Pakistan is sitting on, does have critical minerals. So I think he was able to sell that. And then, of course, you can't get away from the fact, and this has been reported extensively, the cryptocurrency stuff with World Liberty Financial, people in Trump's inner circle involved with that. I think he very quickly figured. So I think he just figured out what works in, and then you had the flattery and the Nobel Peace Prize. And then you had the fact that, Pakistan actually performed quite creditably in Operation Sindoor. Now, the experts can sort of do this sort of, nitpick, and certainly you can, if you look at it in terms of who damaged more sites, obviously, I think, it's fair to say that India did more. But on the fact is that Pakistan was up against a country that is many times larger. It's certainly down to a certain number of Indian fighter jets. We still haven't seen an official number from the Indian side. And from a Washington perspective, and I've spoken with people about this here, the view was that Pakistan performed much better than people thought it would. And I think in Trump's White House, that earned a measure of respect. So, it's a combination of some of the sort of, desi dark arts of flattery, manipulation, and such things, and some kind of real, genuine developments that have worked together. So I think those are the. But I agree with you that there isn't as much there. So I would be very surprised, for example, if 3 years from now this has been transformed into a return to the good old days. I don't think we're returning to the good old days, but at least he's turned the page on the bad old days compared to the Biden era. And then again,
very well said. Very well said. Very well said.
Lastly, on the Iran question, again, there's been a willingness to see it as a target of opportunity and play the card. Like in many countries, the instinct would have been, well, why should I get into this? And I think that there was a recognition that getting into this was more advantageous as long as Pakistan could play its cards quite deftly and not get actually sucked into a war, which would be disastrous for Pakistan. And so I think so far he's had the confidence and the agility. Obviously, there are many competent people in the Foreign Office in Pakistan. And I think he's managed to, pull this off. I mean, maybe we'll be having a different conversation in 6 months or a year, but I think so far he has been a shrewd judge of Trump's Washington, and he's made that work for Pakistan and also, to his own personal advantage, obviously.
Yeah, I think one of our friends called it the CCC factor. He got the counterterrorism bid down. He got the crypto deal with Trump's family, friends. In fact, his family's on the board of that company, World Liberty Financial. He bought into, of course, the Trump's infatuation with critical minerals, and tap that right in. But I think the final C was quite important. Courting Trump, or courting Trump's court, which he really read. I do think that his background as a intel operative, somebody who knows the dark arts of personalities and profiles and watches politicians for a living and gets rid of them for a living as well and manipulates them for a living as well. And as the first army chief to be the head of the MI and the ISI, I think that gives him some special dark skills. But my turn now to ask you a quick question. There's a cost to all of this. And you mentioned this, but I want you to expand on it because you only touch upon it, that the army is Pakistan's greatest international asset, but it's also its greatest liability. It chokes the living soul out of Pakistan's democracy, but also has a stranglehold on the country's political economy, the actual economy across the board. Tell us more about the paradox in that department. How do you see this happening?
Yeah, and this is something we've touched upon in previous conversations, Wajahat. It's in a way it's the tragedy of Pakistan, right? That the military is in many ways, I think, if you benchmark it globally, it's a competent organization, right? One of the points I make is that Pakistan has never had a colonel's coup. Chain of command has held. It's held even now, right? Look at the odds against it holding, in a sense, right? This guy comes in, he's not regarded as the most natural choice for the job. There are all these questions about retirement age. There's the fact that he doesn't come from Kakul. There's all this stuff going on. You've got Imran Khan at the peak of his popularity, but still there's, some of it may be Munir's attributes, but I would say that a lot of that is just that the Pakistani army is a fairly disciplined, cohesive force when it comes to things like chain of command, right? So it's an institution that, in many ways, this is the institution that allows Pakistan to punch above its weight, right? Why are the Turks interested? Why are the Saudis interested? They wouldn't be interested if the Pakistani army was, let's say, like the Bangladeshi army, just to sort of take a random example. It's because the Pakistani army has a certain amount of heft, quite apart from the nuclear weapons. But this is not an army that has shown any ability or any real interest even in developing Pakistan, right? And here the contrasts are very obvious. Contrast, for example, the Pakistani army with, let's just forget the East Asian outliers, forget South Korea and Taiwan. So they're in a different league, right? These are world-beating economies. But even if you look at countries that are done sort of, not as well as, say, South Korea or Taiwan, look at Indonesia under Suharto, right? So basically, between 1968 and 1998, 30 years, Indonesia had transformative growth. It absolutely, it made deep inroads against poverty. It began to industrialize. He really, and Suharto himself would, he would refer to him. I used to live in Indonesia. He would be referred to as Bapak Pembangunan, which basically means the father of development. He wanted people to see him as the father of economic development. Or take Chile, other side of the world. Augusto Pinochet. Again, this is a person who takes power, 1973, takes it, forcibly, basically kills the civilian leader who preceded him, but then, brings in these advisors from Chicago and basically authors the Chilean miracle. And you just haven't had that. You had a glimmer of that in Pakistan's case in the Ayub era, right? When he had these advisors coming in from Harvard, growth rates were above 6%. Manufacturing was over, manufacturing growth was over 9%. And I came across this amazing statistic in a piece by the former Pakistan Central Bank Governor Ishrat Hussain. Apparently, in the late 1960s, Pakistan's manufacturing exports were greater than the manufacturing exports of, I believe, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia combined.
Wow.
So there was a period from the sort of the 60s where it looked like the Pakistani military was sort of in that development military mode that we've seen in other countries. But then since then, the whole thing has fallen apart. And by the time we come to the Afghan war in the 1980s, even though, the economy did pick up in terms of growth rates and so on, there you see the pattern that has remained, which is that generals basically enriching themselves, enriching their families, but not really doing that much for the country's development. And that has sadly been the pattern since then. And I don't see that pattern changing. So that's number one, right? This is not an army that is a development-oriented army. And the second is the point that you just raised, that the political cost, the political retardation, right? That it affects. I don't know. I mean, you have a better sense of this than me, but my feeling is that I can't, in all the years that I've followed Pakistan, I actually don't think that I've ever seen media freedom this low. This is really bad. This is worse than, formally. This is way worse than the Musharraf era, for example. And that there was formal military rule then, right?
You made me sit up. This is my favorite subject.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, and so there is the cost in terms of political representation, in terms of civil liberties, in terms of freedom of speech. All of that has been a very high price to pay, and Pakistan has paid that without actually extracting some of very often people talk of this in terms of a trade-off, right? That okay, we lost some civil liberties, but we got some we got some economic benefits out of it, right? That's what the Chinese communists sell their people. That okay, you don't get civil liberties, but you get higher living standards. And the Pakistani military, at least since the 1980s, has been better at taking away civil liberties and political rights than at delivering economic benefits. And I think that, in a nutshell, is the problem.
Yeah. Imran Khan calls the times we live in not martial law, but Asim law. Just FYI. That's how he delineates and demarcates, rather, previous martial law regimes versus what's going on. He thinks the man is beyond a typical quasi-dictator. He thinks the man is determined by the lack of what he calls mental stability. I'm not sure if I agree with Imran's assessment, but I will give you some stats. Pakistan's number 1 on the global terror index. Pakistan's lost several spots since the Asim Munir tenure in the global world freedom indices run by the RSF or the CPJ for press freedom. Economically, we're still on life support, on the record-breaking 25th IMF program. The longest insurgencies now in South Asia are living on in Pakistan with a 3-tiered insurgency now, the Baloch, the Taliban, and the ISIS connection. Meanwhile,
and then you had the stuff happening in Pakistan, Kashmir also recently.
And now the whole Kashmir thing, which has been intact for almost 80 years. Kashmir banega Pakistan. Kashmir is the jugular vein of Pakistan. That has been shattered in just now exactly 60 days. 60 days back is when it all started, and it's shattered Pakistan's belief in the whole Kashmir narrative and Kashmir's belief in the Pakistan narrative. Most importantly, Azad Kashmir's belief. So there's a lot he's put at stake here, but he calls it the price of being a hard state. And he thinks that if the state just presses down, and this was my earlier bit about the whole disciplinarian thing, because people who met him say that he's convinced, he has no doubts. He is very clear, crystal clear, that the hard state means Pakistan's a nuclear power. It should act like it. Pakistan's the world's 5th largest country in terms of population. It should act like it. Pakistan's the world's 5th largest military. It should act like it. Quote unquote, people have said that it should behave like its size. I'm not sure I agree. I'm more prone to your analysis that there are fundamental cracks here, but that's what he's thinking. But anyways, we've got to wrap this up. This is way beyond our time, and it's been so interesting. Last but not least, your book. I'd like to know. This is quite exciting. Firstly, bahut mubarak, badhai ho. Yeah, this is. It's not easy. It's not easy to write a book, considering the discipline it takes, considering the consistency it takes. Tell us about your book. Tell us about your thoughts regarding Mr. Modi. Tell us where we can get it. Tell us what we can expect from it, Sadanand. Last word is yours.
Yeah, very quickly, well, what you have on your screen right now is the US cover. It's available for pre-order right now in the US on Amazon. It's also available for pre-order in the UK. It has a different cover. In the UK, it's being published by HarperCollins. In the US, it's being published by Yale University Press. And, it's really a look at India since 2014 and what has happened basically in 3 broad areas. I look at the question of religious pluralism and the old Indian traditions of religious pluralism and how they've come under pressure from a Hindu nationalist government led by Mr. Modi. I look at the economy, where I think it's a little bit more of a mixed bag, where there's some positives and some negatives. But I certainly think that all in all, I don't think that the reality of the performance matches some of the hype that one has seen. And then finally, coming to the question about democracy, we're talking about democratic problems in Pakistan, and I don't think the problems are as severe in India, but at the same time, it's undeniable that there's been democratic backsliding in India. And over there, my prognosis is unfortunately not very bright. I mean, I try to be as realistic as I can in my analysis of India as I do in my analysis of Pakistan. and I can't say I'm very optimistic about the prospects at this moment.
Wow, dismal analysis from a Pakistani and an Indian on the eve of the 14th and 15th of August. Well done, my friend. Well done. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Sadanand Dhume is from, of course, our favorite city these days, Washington, D.C. He is on the Council of Foreign Relations. He's the opinion columnist for East is East of the Wall Street Journal. And he is also a very dear friend to stay up this late for me. Thank you, sir, for this time. And hopefully, inshallah, see you soon. And by the way, happy Independence Day if you celebrate it for your old country. I know I still celebrate it for my old country, but we hopefully will debate. I do want to talk to you about India versus Pakistan, 79 years on, hopefully maybe next week. I do want to take that on, especially considering the topic of your book and the topic of our column of your column today.
Thank you, Wajahat. All the best, and happy Independence Day to you also.
Thank you, sir. All right. That was Sadanand Dhume. I am Wajahat Saeed Khan. You can catch him at Dhume on X. He's a hell of a tweeter, by the way. Can we still say that? Yeah, I think I can. Share, like, subscribe, comment, and I will talk to you very, very soon in the next one. Pakistan, Zindabad.